Well, thanks everyone for being here. Um, so we're going to talk today about deep HVAC decarbonization. So we have a couple of project examples to talk to you about, and since we have a nice small group here, we're happy to make it kind of more of a conversation as we go. So feel free to fire any questions at us. I'm Chris from GreenerU, Vice President of Engineering. I've been with GreenerU since 2012. The company was started in 2009. You'll hear a little bit more about the kind of work that we do and our projects as we go through, and I'll pass it to Eric.
Eric Grunebaum, also from GreenerU, and been working with them for about 3.5 years. And loving doing it. We're doing some really fun, cool stuff, helping organizations, mostly nonprofits, figure out the pathway to decarbonization, which sometimes can be very quickly, and sometimes it can be a little bit over time.
Yeah, so like I said, we got two case studies. So Temple Shir Tikva and then the Wellesley Village Church. I'll talk a little bit about the first one, hand off to Eric for a little longer overview of the Wellesley Village Church project, which is in construction now. And then we have just kind of a few sort of final thoughts on how to think about planning for this type of project and decarbonization in general. So yeah, so this is a great project that we love sharing about at the Temple Shir Tikva in Wayland. The sort of the backdrop to when we got introduced to the temple and to the project was that there was some planning already underway. There had been some failures of some equipment, some rooftop units were failing, and they had found a way to kind of cobble together a couple things and make things work. But they knew it was an issue, and some other equipment that was coming up to the end of its life, although it was still operating. Indoor air quality was a concern because of the failed equipment, the ventilation. They had some old ductwork that ran underneath the slab, which had really, there was no access to it, so it wasn't able to be cleaned. And this was supplying, learning spaces, kind of like the room we're in here. They have a daycare and education wing that operates throughout the year. And of course, at the same time, the congregation was looking to, make some advances in their sustainability and really wanted to use this opportunity of the equipment failures and the investment they would make in replacing them, something that aligned with their sustainability goals and an opportunity to reduce their fossil fuel emissions. So just kind of overview of the project that ended up getting developed there, and they worked with a separate consultant, not our firm, but Building Evolution Corp, who advised them on doing an assessment of the building. And
Jim,
I was gonna say, yeah, and thank you, Jim, for that. And feel free to add anything that I'm leaving out, or probably have some good details as well. But the eventually selected technology was an air source heat pump, or a system called VRF, which is variable refrigerant flow. So it's a form of air source heat pump, and that was used, or that became kind of the primary heating source. They did retain a small portion of natural gas heating with the boiler system. That was partly for peak loading and partly for backup. But they've, as we'll show, they managed to reduce about 85% of their total natural gas usage with the new system.
How many tons would that be?
How many tons was that unit? I don't know the answer to that. It's a great question. Do you happen to know?
I'll look at my laptop, which is right here.
Well, I think around 100 tons actually, because based on the incentive number, they would have got about $3,500 per ton.
Yeah,
And so that tells me that I think
that sounds right.
Yeah.
44,000 square feet.
Yeah.
So good sized project in terms of the cost and the investment they had to make, but it really addressed a lot of the issues that they were facing as far as performance of the equipment, resolving issues with air quality, ventilation. They had better control, and the big impact to their emissions was a big part of it. This is actually a simplified version of the process, believe it or not. It was not a straightforward thing, and they worked hard, over quite a period of time, even before we were involved, to really understand, what their path forward would be. So they had a task force that got together. They decided to do this comprehensive study, sort of look at all the existing equipment, existing conditions, understand what the options are, and things that they could consider to move forward. Wound up looking at some preliminary pricing for those different options, picked one, moved forward, and then went into a detailed design process with some engineering work. And from there, that allowed them to go get real pricing, including from GreenerU. Once they had hard pricing, really putting the funding together was the next order of business. And we'll talk more about that side of things, and then moved into construction. So that was the basics of the steps along the way. So some of the just kind of key takeaways we'd like to mention here, that again, that need for renewal of the HVAC system sort of also, it's a challenge, but also presents an opportunity because, you know, the de facto, just when something breaks, replace it with the same thing again, kind of gets you stuck. And they recognize that we need to think a little differently about what to do in this situation, looking forward. One of the big challenges here was that the building was occupied and remained occupied during the construction phase. We took a lot of careful coordination with our team and with the temple and their staff to work around periods of time when there were, you know, kids learning, there were other activities. So a lot of scheduling, a lot of coordination to try to minimize that disruption and let them continue operating and switch the systems over. Sustainability, you know, goals and alignment was really important with their values. And again, just recognizing that they were choosing not to, you know, invest in another 20 or 30 years, sort of hitching their wagon to a fossil fuel based system. So yeah, I think I will.
Probably missed it. Where is this project?
In Wayland.
Okay.
Yep.
But they don't have, Wayland doesn't have Birdo.
No, they don't have Birdo.
Oh, you're saying in case Birdo gets passed?
Yeah, and
Okay.
yeah, I mean, and there is so currently there's a statewide reporting requirement that's just starting now. Actually, this month is due for the first time. They're still developing regulations.
Okay.
And there is not yet a building performance standard. But I think a lot in Massachusetts a lot of folks are saying, okay, Birdo is sort of the model. It could be coming. And even if it's not coming in a, you know, letter of the law sense, it's still a good framework for how to create a pathway to get to net zero over time, and using those kinds of metrics to use that as a guide and set goals, you know,
Some
internally.
developers, some big building owners are thinking that way, like we better decarbonize, because we better have a plan to be decarbonized by 2050.
Right, yeah.
Because Birdo is likely coming.
Birdo could be
Could
coming.
be 2 years, could be 5 years. Do we know? No, but do you want to invest in something for 20 or 30 years when there could be a $234 a ton penalty, you know, in 3 years?
Yeah.
We just don't know when, but it seems to be on the horizon.
Good.
So I take it as a forced air system,
Yeah,
so they just had all the ductwork, so that's relatively easy.
I
Yeah.
think the duct work actually, okay, now you may know more than I do, but on the technical aspect, I think the duct work was actually repurposed for ventilation.
Okay.
And the distribution heads are like, they look like mini splits.
Yes.
And they're around, and there's the, you know, refrigerant is piped around the building to each of those heads.
So they were split systems.
I mean, the whole thing is a split system, it's just a gigantic split system
Yeah.
instead of a mini split,
Right.
you know, with the indoor and outdoor near each other, it's like big outdoor units on actually, you know, the crane picture, and you see the guy Sebastian standing next to them. The outdoor units are the up there on the roof, and then the distribution is all around.
Oh, that was showing the new units, that picture.
Yeah, go back to Sebastian at the top, there you go. I believe those are the
Yeah.
new units,
Yep.
yeah.
these are the condenser units, or the outdoor units, they call them, they're lined up here. And then this refrigerant piping had to be run, and so a lot of the disruption internally had to do with routing the refrigerant lines to the indoor units, opening walls, opening ceilings. The indoor units need to have drains, so there need to be condensate drains coming out from them.
The question I always have in these houses of worship are the worship spaces, the big, huge, you know, often tall ceiling, you know. How do you, even with splits, do you just have to put a ton of splits in there, or?
You showed that a slide of your process, and it starts with the task force and then the comprehensive study. Yes, exactly. And I am curious what approximately the cost is, or how much you spent. You know, there's so many questions over whether this is even feasible for our building. Is our ductwork gonna work? Do we have roof space for all of this? How much do you spend before you know you can even do it? That's my question.
Question.
That's a really good question. One thing I'll just say here is that this is sort of a diagram of the process that the temple used, and we GreenerU became involved a little bit further down here. So to get sort of all the details and particulars of that, I'd be happy to connect you with someone from the temple who can probably explain more. But what I will say is, I think you sort of hinted at it there, but I like the approach of, starting small and taking small steps at a time. So you may need to do some kind of preliminary small assessment to just even understand what you're dealing with in terms of what do we have, what's feasible, what are the options? And there are, relatively lower cost ways and approachable ways of doing that. But making that decision that we need to start getting this information, we need to take a step here and start understanding the situation more is a great place to begin. And I think that's how this kind of rolled out with the task force and making that first decision to let's do some kind of assessment. Let's take a look, whether it's a facility condition assessment, or we offer something called like a zero over time plan. I was just talking with Jim about that. It's sort of like what are the feasible pathways to doing something over time and not necessarily all at once.
Also, I'd just say that the short answer is if you're in New England, come and have us take a look, and or another company, and because it's very hard to say, we need to see your building and do a walkthrough to get a sense of what would be the cost and what is it you're trying to accomplish. What's your time scale? What's your ability? How old is the equipment, and are you going to need to replace it? So are you already baked in with some costs? Are you thinking about, would you need a capital campaign at some point? Like, there's a lot of questions it's not like we could just, I could say somewhere between $5,000 and $50,000.
Yeah.
Like, that might be a price range, but it really, we should, the best way to figure this out is to take a look at it and walk through it, and Mass Interfaith Power and Light, Jim is here. They do great assessments for low cost. Anyway, so
$500.
Well, I'll ask Interfaith Power and Light. I have some, thank you, some idea, one thing that we did, we did our solar about 6 years ago. And so we have some experience with the process. We're in California though, at San Francisco. And if you have any resources or people who would be good, because what we found, one set of engineers would come in and evaluate for one thing, but they weren't familiar with our end game. And it was really hard to.
You need a GreenerU in San Francisco. To be honest,
we do.
So that's kind of what we do. I can look around. I know some folks there. I can see if I can refer you to a company, but like, that is kind of what we specialize in, is really big picture, looking at all of the opportunities and not picking a winner early on, because that's what we do. Like, we'll build it, but we can also just do the engineering. But we don't care what the right solution is. It's really trying to figure out what's the most cost-effective solution, which is like a good segue into Wellesley Village Church. So I think I'm gonna.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks for your question. Okay, so right on topic. This actually is exactly that. It's that deeper dive into what is the right solution. And they formed a task force you can leave it on that for a little while, actually. Just a little preamble stuff. In 2015 through 2018, they had a task force, an energy task force, beginning to decarbonize with efficiency projects, and doing the smaller stuff, the lighting, the controls, and heat, so air sealing and maybe insulation. That was before our time. But one of the things they built into that, which was important, was a study of what is our future HVAC decarbonization pathway. So they recognized that it wasn't going to necessarily happen now, because there's a lot of early, lower hanging fruit, but they wanted to know what are they going to do going forward. And so they did a study. And then in 2018, they said, well, we've got a different capital campaign. We think we're going to do geothermal. Sorry, I skipped that. We think we're going to do geothermal, but we've got a different capital campaign going on right now. So we're going to delay the geothermal transition, and also our equipment is still working. So we're not at the dire state that Temple Shear Tikva was at. But they got through that capital campaign and had this engineering study on geothermal. And in 2023, they were like, okay, now stuff is beginning to fail. We're through the other capital campaign. Let's figure out, can we really do this geothermal project? We've got a good basis of engineering for it, but we really need to refresh it and figure out, is this the exact right approach? Because there are different ways to configure it. And how much will it cost, today to do this now? Because we're ready. And so that's when they approached us really and said, let's figure out how to do this. We need a project management company that can really help us sort this out. But then they also said, maybe we want to look at another option, which is the Temple Shear Tikva air source heat pump option. So they wanted to look at both of them and compare them. And so the first thing we did was this study, and this is the total cost of ownership study for both. So now you can click to the next one. Probably don't need to do the HVAC crash course, but this was actually part of a presentation that was given to the congregation. So it was done in lay terms so that people could then vote on it after the presentation. So we taught them what a boiler was and heat pumps, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps. A key takeaway here is that air source heat pumps don't make heat, they actually move heat. Everybody's nodding and knows this. I don't know who's online, but they have trouble when it gets cold out, and we're in a cold weather climate here. So when it's 10 degrees out, it's hard to get heat out of the air. So they're less efficient than ground source heat pumps, aka geothermal, which are dealing with much more steady temperatures in the ground of I think approximately 55 degrees. So there's a difference there that's important. I think we can go to the next one. Distribution, everybody knows this, but radiators have circulate heat, and rooftop units can do heating, cooling, and bring in fresh air and ventilation through ducts. Go on to the next one. So the existing system, oil, bad. We don't like oil. Very old oil.
Steam or just hydronic?
I think it was steam, but actually I'm not 100% sure. End of life boilers, they knew they just didn't want to do this, but figuring out what else to do. High operating costs, high emissions, low efficiency. Then for cooling, also nearing the end of life, I think they were older systems, they were not that efficient. I think they're essentially like one-way heat pumps, right? They're air conditioners.
Yes.
So then what are the options? So we can click to the next one. So the first option that they wanted to look at, it was a bit of a curveball because first we thought we were just going to do geothermal, then all of a sudden, let's really unpack this other option.
I was just going to say, it got to that point where they said, okay, let's start planning to move ahead with this, but it is a large investment. It was a large enough investment that there were folks who said, wait a second, have we also considered something that would be significantly less expensive, which would be this option one? So it was sort of worth pausing there to just double check. Let's do a little more math and kind of really make a true comparison here.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So this system, which we essentially, I would say, took it to probably schematic design level or thereabout concept level design. Used a natural gas boiler for those very cold days, whatever it is, 10 days, 20 days. I think this winter it felt like 30 days of super cold weather. So you have that natural gas backup and it reduces the peaks. And from the last session I was on, those peaks can actually be very dirty because you're using oil to make electricity at the power plants. The one in Everett, I think it goes to oil, and the one in Cambridge also. So it's not necessarily a good thing to use electricity when it's very cold out. So that natural gas boiler, it's not the worst thing in the world. And then the air source heat pumps though take the lion's share of the year, summer cooling and shoulder season heating and cooling. And so that was sort of the approach for that. And you can see, a few little details on that. Definitely better than oil, no question about it. So then the second option was the geothermal ground source heat pump idea. And of course, the lowest operating cost, highest efficiency, used the rooftop units similar to the air source heat pump option. They're heating and cooling, but now you don't need the natural gas boiler because you're getting heat in the winter from 55-degree earth rather than from 10-degree outside temperature. So that's what makes the geothermal much more efficient. and arguably more expensive because you're drilling wells. Then I think we get into the meat of the study. Okay, so these are the categories we looked at. So now you're looking at, you're really trying to, you can call it a techno-economic analysis or a technology and economic analysis. Like, which way do we go? How much is it going to cost? What should we look at? Obviously, the upfront capital costs, the operating costs, utilities and maintenance, also equipment replacement, like how long is this stuff going to last? When are we going to need to replace it? And then there's the non-economic costs, the social cost of carbon, but in some towns or cities, I guess they're all cities, that can be pretty high, $234 a ton. And if it comes statewide at some point, maybe they'll use $234, we don't know yet, but there could be a cost there too. And then you have to convert these long, duration, 10, 20, 30, we did out to 2050 into today's dollars. So you're really comparing apples and apples. And they wanted a 50-year time horizon. I think they've been around since 1760 something or other. So 50 years doesn't seem so long when you've been around for that long. So you can click to the next one. So now we get into the study itself. So the capital cost, top level, obviously, significantly more for geothermal than the air source gas option, but then mass save incentives significantly higher for geothermal. So that helps. You have a tax credit right now. This project, probably everybody knows that investment tax credits are under grave threat right now. We're hoping geothermal sticks around because it's drilling and some folks like drilling a lot.
Drill, baby, drill.
Exactly, but for Wellesley Village Church's sake, we actually started the project in 2024. We did the first test well, which will be a production well, in December 2024. That picture you saw with the wreath was, right around Christmas wreaths and the steeple, and so that well was drilled in 2024, and we're going to be beginning drilling most of the wells, I think next week actually. So hopefully, that we have the safe harbor for Wellesley Village Church, and knock on some wood here that that tax credit will make it through the Senate, but we'll see. But that that does a lot to bring the net cost much closer to parity. And then the next one is the operating costs, which because the air source heat pump is it does use natural gas, but it's more intensive, and you add those together and you get a little bit more than the geothermal.
I would have expected a much bigger differential.
I was surprised too, and
and
it's because the natural gas knocks out
yeah.
those super cold days, so you're not, but you do have a natural gas cost then. So this surprised me as well. It is lower than what they were paying for oil heat, so that's nice. You're getting a little savings there. But I'll trust the engineers and mathematicians who did the study, who did the work at GreenerU
Are these actual numbers?
No, these are projected.
Total, just
And this is projecting year one. And then I think the next slide projects it for 50 years and then corrects it to net present value dollars. And what you see, and I think this has to do with the higher inflation rate for gas, is that they diverge over that long time frame. And I think it also has to do with the fact that we would expect much more renewable energy to be on the grid in that time frame, so that electricity prices for that, because there is no fuel for renewable energy, should decline. And I think Harvey Michaels in the other session suggests that if we just fill in the curve of in the middle of the day when charge your cars in the middle of the day and preheat your house or pre-cool your house more, or buildings in the middle of the day, that actually electricity prices should not go up at the rate that gas prices. So we could have a debate about this, which we shouldn't right now, but the math that we came out with using those inflation figures made the natural gas plus air source heat pump considerably more over that time frame. And then if you click on the next one, is I can see Artie wants to talk, but why don't we wait? Because we're not that far from the summation of it all.
Yeah, we'll put a pin in that.
You know,
We'll
we can have
go
a
back.
discussion on this. Yeah, well, and you're making all that, Artie is just, for those who are online, Artie is at a solar installation company called NEC, one of the
Yeah,
sponsors.
I'm an engineer at the company.
Yeah, so hopefully you'll be helping moderate those electricity prices by doing a lot more solar. There's plenty of room for it if you look around. Whenever I fly out of Boston, I look down at all the roofs and I'm like, where's all the solar? You know, it's
Oh, yeah.
massive amounts of space. But anyway, getting back to this point, the air source heat pumps are a lot shorter in terms of their longevity. I think I've heard primarily because they're outdoors versus the heat pumps for geothermal are in your basement or wherever your utilities are. And so then again, another savings because you don't have to replace the heat pumps for geothermal at the frequency that the air source heat pumps. So add that all together and you get the magic answer on the next slide, which is that at the bottom, there are nearly equivalent.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
But it takes about 50 years to even.
Yes, admittedly, that's a very long time frame, and that's Wellesley Village Church chose that time frame. If you picked 30, they probably wouldn't be. But there is no social cost of carbon and no BERDO penalty, alternative compliance penalty on this page. So they're equal, forgetting about emissions or any potential future cost of emissions.
Yeah.
So then if you go to the next page, and this is net present value dollars. This is the difference in the amount of carbon emissions and just using vehicles as your sort of metric. It's about double for the natural gas plus air source heat pump versus geothermal. So that's a major difference. And that's without any economic penalty. That's just the social cost of carbon, which is the penalty on everybody.
And I know Wellesley Village Church has solar already.
Yep.
Are they? But I assume the heat pump will probably boost above what their cylinders.
I think it's small, pretty small. I've been up on that roof. Yeah, it's on a slate roof, which is amazing. I've never seen one on a slate roof before, but it's a pretty small array.
Yeah.
And I think it broke basically, and the third party owner basically didn't want to fix it. So they were gonna buy it, and I don't know where that negotiation ended
I
up.
didn't want to walk on the slate roof.
I mean, I think they just forget about it. We can't have whoever paid for it was like, never mind, we don't really want to own that. So I'm curious at where that ended up. But in any case, getting back to the carbon, and actually we might as well go to the last slide, I think, which is that they did, it's the third bullet, but they did want to, or excuse me, the fourth bullet, they wanted to consider the social cost of carbon. Even though it wasn't an economic cost, they were definitely long-term focused. I think per Artie's points, there's a lot of variability and uncertainty, so you have to make some assumptions, and it's very transparent what the assumptions were, and that's where it came out. Now, could it be? Let's say you were off. It could be off by $50,000 or $100,000 pretty easily. It's probably not off by $500,000 or $1 million. I don't think the tolerances are that great. So would they have decided if the ground source heat pump geothermal had been $200,000 more? I suspect they probably would have gone for it anyway because they would have thought about the potential future cost of carbon and because they were committed to it. And so I think that's kind of pretty much the end of the Wellesley Village Church. The only thing I would say that's not on the screen there is that in both cases, Shir Tikva and Wellesley Village Church, the fact that they had done planning for years before the equipment failed was really, it was like a good investment of, and per the caller Deb's question, how much does it cost? It's kind of small money when you compare the fact that you might be stuck with dead equipment and then you're forced into a position where you might have to just replace what you have with something in kind, and you're kind of forced into that position if you don't do the pre-planning. So I think that might be a good segue into your
Not only with something in kind, but whatever the distributor you're installing can get us.
they have
The next week.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can call up a plumber and say, replace my boiler. And I'm like, oh, we've got a more efficient boiler, maybe a few percent more efficient. And we're gonna do some repiping, but we don't really need an engineering study. It's not that level of engineering. It's kind of a one-to-one replacement. And so when you're talking about decarbonization, it isn't a one-to-one replacement. It's more complicated. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we always recommend that whenever a house of worship is going through a replacement cycle, get a mechanical engineering study or make sure your contractor is gonna do the manual J. Because almost every system that we see is vastly oversized.
Yeah,
And it was installed 15, 20 years ago.
yeah.
Every airport air source heat pump system is vastly oversized.
Every, fossil fuel system,
Okay,
vastly oversized.
So that-
Every building, houses of worship primarily you're looking at. but-
But we looked really nicely about like, you know, how much carbon you're ameliorating and how those come into balance. But what you're saying is suggest that also, you know. I'm expecting there are substantial savings by actually doing all the work to.
Yeah.
To actually transfer to a more efficient system.
Right.
Because I'm not looking at a congregation that is where like the social benefit is probably high on the list of a lot of people, certainly the people who do the maintenance committee. But if you can tell them like, no, if we switch to a more efficient system, like our annual expenses are gonna go down, that's a case that we can make more powerful.
For sure, and a lot of the work we do starts there, like what is cost effective?
Yeah.
And how can we reduce costs of whoever is trying to do whatever it is they're trying to do, replace the system, make it more efficient and more cost effective.
Yeah, and I think just to your point, what you've identified there is what criteria will be used to help make a decision, right? And so that financial analysis, that's almost always one of the criteria, but there are sometimes others, and like the social cost of carbon can be one, and the impacts to the space, and how the building gets sort of used over time, and improvements, investing in that. So getting involvement from all the people who are going to have a voice in the decision, understanding what's important, that I think in both of these projects was really key to the process, was taking the time to engage with all of the stakeholders and talk about what's important for us as a group to decide on and use the criteria. And that's
I have
kind
a
of,
question, but I don't wanna take up your time.
go ahead.
When is geothermal worth looking at and when is it not? I take it from individual home, it's not worth looking at. Is it, if you're building a new neighborhood, a new campus, if you have a big campus, is it worthwhile to look at geothermal? What do you think?
I think it's always worth thinking about and taking a little bit of a look at, and to the question earlier about how do you sort of take small enough steps to know what your next step's going to be and invest in something there. I think definitely more expensive. The tax incentive that we hope is still around is really helping to close that gap, and also the mass save incentives. So there are projects where it's almost on par with an air source option, and it depends on what the existing system is, and it depends on a lot of other factors. But I think it's always worth at least kind of keeping on the table for a very preliminary, early.
Single family home?
I'd say it's more, I've talked to Dandelion, which is an offshoot of Google X, and I think about like as if it's like the Tesla Roadster. Sorry, Tesla's a bad name now, but the Roadster was purchased by high net worth folks, or the first people who bought their iPhones. So I think there is a role for geothermal in individual houses. What Dandelion is doing actually is very smart. They're going to large home building companies that are building 1,500 homes in Colorado and doing like one well per day per house, and they've actually got it to be less than air source heat pumps. Which is amazing. So that's another place. And for whole communities, we have a community in Sonoma County, California, that we're advising, and it's going to be a brand new community of 1,000 units. And that's something where we want, they would like to consider geothermal for a larger community.
But there's economy of scale there.
Yeah. No, and for a house of worship, I would say that it's worth keeping on the table upfront and doing at least schematic, and I would say dependence to a large degree on the tax credits, because that's the big difference maker. And the organization's ability to raise money or get grants is a big factor. Another one is if they're on oil versus gas, and if there is no gas pipeline. So we're talking to a museum in an area where there's no gas, so they're on oil, 37-year-old system. So now the ground source looks very good in comparison to oil. So anyway, we could talk more, but maybe we should.
I mean, I come across this fairly often. start geothermal versus air source. And I'm a bigger fan of geothermal, personally, so. Because I've seen the curves, the energy curves, and during the summertime, it's barely a blip. Because it's already at temperature, there's not a lot of energy conversion needed to keep, have it at temperature, so I'm a fairly big fan of that. And, and obviously on those two comparisons, if you converted the natural gas 6,600, whatever, to it, kilowatt hours, maybe it would be 9,000, 12,000, I'm not sure what it would be, but it would be something quite higher than that. But on brand new houses, I'm definitely a fan for brand new houses, no geothermal.
You're a fan for,
Geothermal for brand new houses.
okay,
Brand new house.
Brand new, I mean, that's an easy, doesn't mean it doesn't work for non-brand new houses. But for brand new houses, I mean, you had 30% tax rate, hopefully still, and I think it was a $1,500 state rebate or credit, however you want to phrase it. And all of a sudden, that cost is coming way down, and definitely the operating cost is definitely lower than the air source. It just probably got a little crazy, although winters are getting warmer, maybe it'll change.
No, that's a good point about new houses being, but there's a bunch of potential use cases for geothermal. Even though there's some examples where it may not be the best fit.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a ductwork in your house, geothermal can definitely work. If you don't, that changes. That changes.
doesn't work with mini splits.
Yeah, I mean, mini splits maybe are a better choice now versus if you already have, ductwork or.
So this is, a lot of these things kind of touch on things we've already talked about a little bit. But just these are kind of like categories of considerations or questions that we typically start to ask and discuss. And like, as I said, we've kind of gotten into a bit of these, but context is really important. The example of like the failing equipment, other maybe problems in the building that have been, looking for a solution for a while, comfort, and then alignment with the mission of the organization is always important. And then other projects, other things that are either being planned or considered as an opportunity to, group things together or take advantage of some other work or some other funding process that's happening. And then again, paying attention to the existing conditions of equipment. Having energy or carbon or climate action goals is important as far as, like we said, sort of gaining support among all of the people who will be participating, all of the stakeholders. And then we talked a little about the reporting compliance. Berto's the Boston, Elber is the one that's now statewide. It's reporting only at this point, but could someday be a groundwork for an actual, performance standard, performance requirement. And we're focusing a lot on Boston, Massachusetts, but there's other states and municipalities all throughout the country that are starting to adopt very similar things, New York and the West Coast and all over the place. So just understanding what that context is and using it as a framework to help guide sort of the decision making moving forward. And then cost and phasing, we talked about like the overtime approaches. The two project examples we gave were pretty holistic as far as, almost full replacement of existing HVAC systems. And for one thing, that's not always necessary. And for another thing, it's not always feasible from a cost standpoint. So we're always trying to look for ways to say, okay, if we can't do the perfect, giant project to just upgrade everything all at once, what would step one be? And then we can think about 2, 3, and 4, and 5 down the road. And that makes it more manageable to take on as a project, and it helps you get on the right kind of trajectory to meet a long-term goal, but even if you're not going to decarbonize 100%, today. And then conditions, I think it's going back to the question of where to begin, just doing a kind of a basic facility assessment, like Jim does, and understanding just sort of what you have, what the opportunities are, what the options are to move forward. Funding is always a big challenge. The examples we gave, there's a couple of ways to go about it. Borrowing through just traditional debt or doing fundraising campaigns is often a way to approach these sort of larger scale projects. And then of course leveraging the incentives that we do have, at least while they're around. And hopefully the tax incentives continue to be there to support ground source projects and others.
I just mentioned on the borrowing, the Congregational Church has an organization called Cornerstone. Which has very reasonable rates for borrowing and very low closing costs, which I've seen can be quite high. So there are some house of worship specific funding sources,
Mm.
and they will fund any denomination of any house of worship. So they've moved, they've focused first on congregational, but now they will fund any house of worship. So that's
the cornerstone.
Cornerstone, yes.
Cornerstone what?
I can connect you if, but I can't, maybe Cornerstone funding, or I'm not sure exactly, but it's a great, it's very good, so, anyway.
It's probably not for this process, the capital thing that we're even about right now.
What's that?
So this is, we're a few capital campaigns
Away from that.
away from even contemplating something like this.
No,
Felt like, you
I
know.
mean, they do focus on lending for energy projects, so I don't know if that.
Yeah, because we got an accessibility project, right?
I would check, it's possible they might, or combine, if there's other things you can
Because that's,
combine.
whenever you start a project, I always encourage house of worship, think about any energy, because the minute you open up a wall, there may be an opportunity to
Yeah.
do something. If you're putting on, ramps or,
Yeah.
installing elevators, or something, there would be a lot of stuff opened up. And as long as the walls are open for a relatively minimal incremental cost, you can usually get some good air sealing, better insulation in that part of the building.
Yeah,
So,
there's another one too for temples and synagogues, Adama, I think that has, I
Yeah,
think that they have even some small grants. Not borrowing, but grant is always nice.
Yeah.
But I'll look that up on my laptop at some point today.
Great. I think that was
That's it.
it's cool.
what we had, so.
Another question, so you mentioned with geothermal that the incentives sadly could go away. Other than that, how are geothermal costs going? Is there, because it's fairly new, because there are greater scale, might they be going down? What do you think?
I mean, I think that's exactly what Dandelion is trying to do. So they are continuing to do sort of high-end houses, or maybe some new houses in there. In New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts only. They're not expanding that. What they're really focusing on is driving the costs down by just getting really good at drilling and being in and out in the day. So that's what they're trying to do, and they're not doing it today, but they're going to eventually apply that cost benefit or cost reduction learning by doing, which is the funniest phrase I've ever heard, but it's a real thing. Like, if you do it 1,000 times in Colorado, then you should be really good at doing it. So I think that they're going to then come back to more the residential market in other parts of the country. And in fact, they used the project in Colorado to drive a better incentive from the utility there. So they got Excel to do a better geothermal incentive. And the founder, CEO of the company who I talked to a few weeks ago said she potentially wants to use this project in Sonoma that we're working on to get PG&E to reduce, to increase their geothermal incentive. So I think there's a process of, and it solves like a lot of problems that utilities have, right? We know there's some great case studies. I think it was from NREL's own building, where they did 1 floor geothermal and 1 floor air source heat pump, and they showed the differences. And if you want to reduce those peaks, you want geothermal. And if there's grid congestion and rolling blackouts that they have in PG&E, like geothermal is the answer. So I think that Dandelion and other companies are working towards exactly that, which is just driving the costs down and using equipment that they have in Europe. It's like existing equipment, but it's in Denmark or Sweden. So I think they brought over some drill rigs.
It is interesting that they measure Europe. Many times we mention Europe, it brings stuff over here.
Yeah, it actually works.
Yes.
Isn't that funny? And in fact, some of us came from Europe originally, so people can come from Europe and stuff. We buy cars from Europe. I mean,
People come over here and go, "Oh."
Okay.
there's a question.
oh, question there.
Yep, Deborah, we see your question in the chat here. To do the geothermal, do you need a certain amount of property space without buildings for wells? Our building covers all of our property, and we have no outdoor space. I mean, generally, yes, you would need some place to drill. We have heard some stories of a geothermal company that has specialized drill rigs that are very low profile, and they've done a project where they've taken them into the underground parking garage below a building, and I think in Manhattan, and we're able to actually set the drill rig up, at a much lower height and drill from inside the basement of a building. That's
pretty well.
That is in a lot of cases not going to be feasible. So that is a consideration.
Would you ask Deb, does that mean they have no pavement space?
Yes, if you can hear that question of the follow-up was, do you have anything as far as like parking lot or paved walkways? There are ways to get creative with very little space, but you would need some. It sounds like you're saying your building is basically all of it, but
You can drill on angles, so
yeah.
if you have any space at all, which sounds like you don't, I see from your chat.
City.
But even pretty tight buildings, you can essentially drill all of your wells from one like line of a building, one side of a building, and drill them at different angles, so that you're getting essentially a well field worth of thermal exchange, but it's coming from angled boreholes. There's a company that actually is talking about moving, they're in Toronto. They've done like 400 geothermal projects, which is a lot of projects. And they're talking about coming down to the metro Boston, Massachusetts, New England area. And they're really good at doing angled boreholes. And so I think that you're gonna see more technology solutions to, space constraints, but unfortunately.
Talking about the city, I mean, I imagine that you can set up on a sidewalk, drill your holes, but then like sort of back out the sidewalk and patch it back up and.
I mean, a progressive city that cares about energy, if you have like an interesting pilot test project that you want to do, and your city is amenable, you might, if you can imagine it, then it can happen. It's really, are you willing to put in the effort, and can you get allies in the city?
Yeah.
Because the sidewalk is there, and once the wells are drilled and you cap them and connect them, there's nothing visible above at ground level. So they'll just put the sidewalk, or you'll put the sidewalk back in probably for the city, and nobody will ever see it or know that it's there.
Yeah.
So I would say, think about that.
Allies with the city and also your neighbors. I mean, there's some cool things happening in the Northeast here with community like district geo. So utilities actually, Framingham did a pilot. And there was another one in the works. There's one in New York too. To basically say this, the ground source water is now the utility that the utility will provide and pipe into your home. And it works well when you get multiple accounts and multiple ratepayers kind of grouping together and leveraging the economies. And anyway, we can pass along some information.
I mean, and if there's a neighboring organization that wants to split 4 wells, 2 for them and 2 for you, or whatever, 8 for you and 8 for them, whatever it is, that's another
City corner with 4 houses of worship, they could go in on this together.
There's a project in Salem
That would be
where
wonderful.
a church and, they're talking to museums and other buildings around them.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining, Deborah, and everyone else on Zoom.
Yeah, thanks for folks on Zoom.
We're gonna end this now, but have a good rest of the day.